Bedford County, brought to you by the Bedford County Bar Association. This presentation is divided into 6 parts. Part 1, Introduction and Recent Changes. Part 2, Costs and Petitioning the Court to waive the cost for filing. Part 3 is Requirements and Definitions for Custody Actions. Where to file, who can file, and what can you file for. Part 4, How to file the custody action. Part 5, Serving the other party. And Part 6, Going before the court, conferences, hearings, and what is in the best interest of the child. This presentation will be most beneficial if you watch it in its entirety. Because this presentation is divided into 6 parts, you can watch it at your convenience. All parts are necessary to understand the custody process. This presentation was developed and approved by the Bedford County Bar Association. This presentation provides general information regarding custody actions in Bedford County, Pennsylvania only. This presentation provides information about the initial custody action and the court process. It does not provide information about relocation, modification, or contempt of an existing order. But know that there are specific portions of the custody statute and procedures dealing with these issues. This presentation is not legal advice. It provides information, definitions, and examples. If you would like legal advice about your specific case or have any questions about how the statute applies to your case, please contact an attorney. Information about finding an attorney will be discussed at a later slide. This presentation contains information from the following sources, including but not limited to the Pennsylvania Custody Statute, the Rules of Civil Procedure, and case law. A statute is a law written and enacted by the legislative branch of government. The custody statute applies to disputes relating to child custody matters. It provides the law that the courts and the parties must follow. The rules of civil procedure provide all the procedures the court and the parties must follow. And the case law are laws based on decisions that judges have made in past cases. All of these sources will be used to guide you through the custody process in Bedford County. The pleadings or documents that will be discussed during this presentation include the petition to proceed in forma pauperis, the complaint for custody, the order of court for the custody conference, the criminal history and abuse verification form, and the confidential information form. These pleadings can be found at the Prothonotary's office or online at the Bedford County website at www.bedfordcountypa.org. Please have these pleadings with you while you view this presentation. We will go through these documents in detail. Having the documents to follow along with while watching this presentation will be extremely helpful so you can properly complete these forms. You will learn about the custody process. After this presentation, you will be able to complete the custody complaint and other documents, distinguish between the different types of custody, identify the best way to serve the other party with the documents and provide proof of service, and describe what you believe is in the best interest using the factors the court will consider. There have been recent changes that do impact the custody process. Effective January 6, 2018, litigants and their attorneys must comply with the public access policy of the Unified Judicial System of Pennsylvania, case records of the appellate and trial courts. This policy is important to know about because it includes changes to completing and filing the custody pleadings. The policy protects confidential information and documents and provides a process to request access to these court records. So when you're completing the pleadings to file with the court, confidential information may not be included in the pleadings and confidential documents may not be attached to the pleadings, and this will limit the public access to these documents. Confidential information includes someone's social security number, financial account number, driver's license numbers, state identification numbers, and most importantly to the custody is the minor's names and date of birth, and abuse victim's address and other confidential information or other contact information. So the minor's names and date of birth can no longer be included in the pleading. Instead, when it asks for a minor's name or date of birth, put down the minor's initials and their age. And you can make a notation on the pleading where that confidential information is omitted or changed. For example, confidential, or see the confidential information form. As you go through this presentation, remember these changes. Specifically Part 2, when you hear about petitioning the court to waive the fees, and Part 4, when you hear about completing the custody complaint. It will take into account that you will be asked about putting the minors' names down, and again, remember, put down their initials. Also, when completing the custody pleadings, do not include an abuse victim's address or other contact information. An abuse victim is defined as a person who has been granted a protection order by the court. If you are an abuse victim or filing against an abuse victim, you must write confidential on the line instead of their address. In the later slides, the later sections of this presentation, remember that when you have to put down the child's name and date of birth or the address of someone who is a victim, that these changes have been made and you now have to put down the initials and age or confidential. The slides that you will hear later on regarding filling out these forms may not include these changes, and you will be held to know about these changes whether it's on these slides or not. So understand about these recent changes as we go forward. When completing the confidential information form, there's a form that you can find either online or at www.pacourts.us/public-records. And that is where you will find this confidential information form. You will complete the caption as you do in other court pleadings. And you could see custody actions in Bedford County, instructions for completing custody pleadings to have a better understanding of how to complete the caption. The court that you will put down is the Bedford County Court of Common Pleas. The next line says this form is associated with the pleading titled. Here you will provide the name of the document that the confidential information form goes with. For example, the complaint for custody. You will then provide the date that you signed this pleading. This form allows the party to provide information for two people with an additional page if necessary. So it says this information pertains to, you will put down the full name of the adult who is filing this pleading. You will then complete any other information that was listed as confidential in the pleading. If the address is confidential, you could write it down in this section, or you can put it at the end where it asks for your name, your address, and your telephone number and your email address. For other information, other confidential information that is listed on this form, such as your social security number, your financial account information, driver's license number, if it has not asked you for this information in the pleading, you do not have to put it on the confidential information form. If your address is confidential, meaning that the other party does not know it and you are requesting the court not allow the other party to know your address, you can leave it out of the confidential information form, but put it on the abuse victim addendum, which we will talk about later. If you listed a minor's initials, use that next section to provide the information about the minor. So where it says this information pertains to a minor with the initials of, use the initials that you put in the complaint, and then put down that minor child's full name and the child's date of birth. If there is more than one minor child, use the additional pages. You will then write down the total number of pages in the confidential information form. You will then review the certification. And that says, I certify that this filing complies with the provisions of the public access policy of the Unified Judicial System of Pennsylvania case records of the appellate and trial courts that require filing confidential information and documents differently than non-confidential information and documents. You will then sign and date this certification, provide your address, telephone number, and email address. You must then sign the certification. The certification will be on the pleadings that you file as well as this confidential information form. Again, you are asked to provide your address. If your address and other information, other contact information is confidential, which means that the other party does not have that information and you're requesting the court keep that information confidential, then you will complete the abuse victim addendum. So the abuse victim addendum, if you are abuse victim as defined by the policy, you may complete the abuse victim addendum in addition to or in place of the confidential information form. This is a part of the confidential information form. If the other party does not know your address and you are requesting that your address remain confidential, then you'll complete this form in addition to the confidential information form. The addendum will only be provided to the court. It will not be served on the other party or the attorney. If you are not seeking to keep your address confidential from the other party, then you may provide all of the confidential information that you list as confidential in your complaint. You can provide that on the confidential information form, and you do not need to complete the abuse victim addendum. Once you have completed the confidential information form and or the addendum, you will file that along with the pleading. You will then serve the confidential information form along with the pleading on the other party or their attorney. And we will go over service of the pleadings to the other party in part 5 of this presentation. As we stated before, the abuse victim addendum is part of the confidential information form. So what is the difference? Well, the addendum is to be used where there are safety issues and the other party does not know the victim's address or their employer or the employer's address. By providing this information only on the addendum, the other party will not have access to this information. Only the court will have access to this information. The form, the confidential information form, must be served on the other party and their attorney, whereas the addendum will be filed with the prothonotary but only accessible to the court. Now, if you have confidential documents to include with your pleadings, you must file them separately with the confidential document form. Normally, when you're filing the complaint for custody, you don't use any documents, but if you do have documents that you want to include, if they are confidential, you must file them separately. Confidential documents relating to custody include, but are not limited to, financial source documents, minors' education records, medical or psychological records, or children youth services records. Again, usually you'll provide this to the court, not in the pleading, but at some point you may want to use those confidential documents, you may want to attach them, and you should speak with your attorney about that. If you are completing the confidential document form, you again complete the caption as you do in other pleadings. The court that you'll put down is the Bedford County Court of Common Pleas, and you'll put down that this form is associated with the pleading titled, and you'll provide the name of the document that that confidential information form goes with. For example, the complaint for custody. Provide the date that you signed that pleading, and check the type of confidential documents that you are including, and list the paragraph, the page, etc., where that confidential document is referenced in the filing. Again, you'll review the certification. You'll sign and date that certification, provide your name and address and email, and you'll file that confidential document form with the pleading. You must serve this form along with the pleading on the other party or their attorney. You must comply with this public access policy. Parties and their attorneys are responsible for complying with the public access policy and must certify that they complied by signing the certification that we discussed before. Again, the certification will be on the pleadings that you sign and file, as well as the confidential information form and the confidential information document sheet. No one will review your pleadings for compliance. If you do not comply with this policy, then the court may order the documents to be sealed, redacted, and/or amended. The court may impose sanctions including but not limited to the cost necessary to prepare a compliant document for filing in accordance with applicable authority. So basically that means that you may have to change that pleading if you don't comply with the policy, and the court may sanction you or fine you for not complying with this policy. For more information on this policy, please visit www.pacourts.us/public records policies. Thank you for watching part 1 of the 6-part presentation. Part 2 will discuss paying the court fee to file the custody complaint or petition the court to waive this fee.